If you're wondering what it costs to get your rating to become a professional pilot for, say, an airline, one of the questions you would have to ask yourself is, how do you plan to get your ratings? Because that will determine the cost of training. Give you an example. We have 3 different ways of how you can get your ratings. First one is you can go through a college or a university that has an aviation program, and they provide the flight training in which you train and then you get your ratings. We have the flight schools that you can easily walk into and get enrolled in a flight training program, and they will take you through the curriculum and you get your ratings that way as well. Or you have the military route, where in which if you join the military, they can provide the training for you and you serve and you spend your time with the military. So those are the 3 major ways in which you can get your ratings. Now there's other option of you buying your own airplane. The 4th option isn't so common because of course it's expensive upfront, but it's generally cheaper overall. So in this video, what does it cost to get your ratings through the first 2? Because the military, there's not really a direct cost to you per se, but there is a cost for a university program and there's a cost for a flight school as well. So the first one that I have here is a university, or in this case actually a polytechnic, that has an aviation program. And looking at what they offer, they have a program that is offered through 2 different flight schools. One is ATP and one is AeroGuard. Now, in no way am I endorsing these universities or training programs. The goal here is just to get a cost, okay? So I don't want you to think by me talking about these programs or telling you about them doesn't mean that they are the best or they're the cheapest or they're the most expensive. That's not the point. The point here is just to get an estimate of what it will cost to go through these different routes. This university doesn't provide the training directly. They partner with an established flight school that then provides the training through them. And of course, you can get your degree along your training as well, along with your training. So in this case, with the ATP program, they have an estimate of about 7 semesters to complete your ratings from private to CFI, MEI, and CFAA as well. And they kind of broke it down in the phases of each semester, what to cost you. And as you can see, these are the breakdown of that. Now, in total, though, they have a planned flight training cost, which in total, they are estimating it will cost you about $120,000. That is, of course, not cheap. As we know, flight training can be quite expensive, but this is one. Looking at the other one from AeroGuard, from the same university, but in this case, the training is provided by AeroGuard, the training would cost around, they have a minimum cost minimums, it's around $95,000, and they have a recommended budget of $114,000. Now, I understand why they would have that separated. The reason is because the average person would generally spend more than what the minimums require. So for example, your private might say you only need 40 hours, but in general, not majority of people don't finish their private in 40 hours. Some will finish at 45, some will finish at 50, some will finish at 60. It all depends. So they generally will give you a recommended budget, which I think is a smart thing to do so that you're not caught off guard by the cost. Now, if you noticed, I mentioned that these training programs is provided through flight school, even though the university is the one offering it, but the training itself is provided by another flight school. I understand why they would do that. The reason is because it's generally cheaper for the university to focus on what they are good at, which is providing college education, and let the flight school run the flight department or run the flight operation for the training. So in this case, by separating the two, I guess it works for this particular university. Not all universities do that. Some universities will have their own in-house flight training program, which that doesn't necessarily mean to be cheaper or more expensive. To be honest with you, sometimes it could be cheaper. It all depends on the university. It all depends on the location. It depends on the type of airplane that they train with. So there's so many factors to this, but this is just to give you an estimate. The next thing I did was I went directly to like ATP. We know that ATP is one of the well-established training facilities in the United States, and they have a quote on their website at around say the fixed cost of around $96,995. So I would say $97,000, starting from zero. So this is definitely slightly cheaper in comparison to what the university offered earlier, as you can see. So it's slightly cheaper with the same ATP program now. And as you can see, these are all estimate as well. Let's look it further to even look at another flight school as well, a well-established one, L3. They are quoting about 94,999. So let's say 95,000. That is another flight school. Again, this flight school does not provide any college education. I took it even further to look for flight schools that are not as big or not as established, but they provide flight training programs and you get your ratings. And something to keep in mind, all these flight schools will give you the necessary training that you need. Now it's now up to you to be as thorough as you want in terms of how much you read, how much you learn, but every flight school will give you all the information you need to become a successful pilot. That's the honest truth about it. But how far you go deep in depth with your reading or your studies and the type of instructor you have can sometimes determine the type of pilot you will become. So I don't want you to think by going to the best flight school means that you become the best pilot. It doesn't necessarily work that way. You can go to a mom and pop flight school and still be a very good pilot. And you can go to the best flight school and be not so great pilot. So keep that in mind. So I went to this other flight school and I had to go through each of their training programs. And the numbers that I came up with was around $68,735 for your training from private to your MEI. Now, all of this, MEI means multi-engine instructor rating. All of this is also an estimate. So the point here is when you are looking at the cost of training or becoming a pilot, always remember that whatever estimate they have given you, try to add some numbers to it. Add maybe 10%, maybe 20%. To be safe, I would say between 10 and 20% as extra. And these are generally just the cost of training, not the living expenses, not your check rides. Because remember, every time you do a check ride, you're inviting a designated pilot examiner. And generally they charge, anywhere between $700 to $1,000 for each check ride you take. So if for any reason you have to repeat that check ride, that's an extra money that you have to spend. If for any reason you have to repeat a state check, that's extra money you have to spend. So most of the time, the quotes they'll give you are generally the bare minimum, with some of them quoting, in this case, for the AeroGuard example that I showed you, they gave an extra, a recommended amount for people to plan for. So these are just the numbers now that I've decided to look at. And I just wanted to give you guys this information so that you can see how those numbers vary depending on the route you take. Of course, like I mentioned, the fourth option that I mentioned earlier was if you could buy your own airplane, but the cost of that upfront can be expensive because you have to buy the airplane, you have to maintain the airplane, hire an instructor. But in the course of your training, say you do your private, you do your instruments on that airplane, you will generally save money because it's your own airplane. You just have to worry about fueling it, maintaining it, and paying the instructor, and of course paying for your check rides and so on. But you are generally on your own, and if your airplane is grounded, then you are pretty much out of luck because that means you can't train. So there are the pros and the cons, but it's something that you need to explore if you're looking for the cheapest ways to save money or cheapest ways to get your training done quickly. Now, one thing I want to say is before you choose any flight school, always make sure that you look at what they provide, the type of airplanes they train in, the type of structure that they provide. Because if you go to a flight school that is not well structured, well, you may end up spending so much time and not achieving anything. If you go to a flight school that is well structured, yes, it might cost you more, but at the same time, you get that structure that you need and you can go through your training easily. Compared to a flight school that is not as structured, yes, it's cheaper, but over the course of time and the frustrations you experience, you end up spending more. So there are pros and cons.